Graduation night. My suitcase rattled over a loose floorboard in the Grayfield house. I lifted it and found a dusty blue folder. Dad's notes, a stock agreement, and an unsent letter to me. The next morning, my stepmother, Celia, smiled over breakfast as if she'd buried nothing. A week later, I walked into Northbridge Conveyance, where she was CFO and where I intended to end everything. My name is Marin Cole. I'm 28 years old, and my new degree in supply chain systems was supposed to be a ticket to anywhere but here. Grayfield, North Carolina, was a place you left, not a place you returned to with a crisp diploma and a fabricated excuse about rent prices in the city. The truth was simpler and more shameful. I had run out of money and momentum. The city had chewed me up and spat me back to the one address I still had a key for. The house on Alder Street stood exactly as I remembered it, a two-story colonial with white paint that was just beginning to peel at the edges, like aging paper. But the moment I stepped inside, the illusion of sameness shattered. The air itself was different. It used to smell of my father, a complex blend of old books, brewing coffee, and the faint, sweet scent of the pipe tobacco he only smoked in his office. Now, it smelled of nothing but lemon polish and a faint, chemical sharpness that clung to the back of my throat. It wasn't just clean. It was scoured, scrubbed of any personality, any lingering trace of the man who had lived and died within these walls. The silence was the second thing I noticed. Dad always had the radio on, a low murmur of classical music, or the drone of the evening news that served as the house's heartbeat. Now, the quiet was absolute, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. It was a sterile, waiting silence that made my skin crawl. Celia was in the kitchen, a vision of domestic perfection. Her blonde hair was swept into an immaculate chignon, not a single strand out of place. Her apron was crisply ironed. She turned from the stove, her smile bright and perfectly symmetrical. It never quite reached her cool, blue eyes. "Marin, darling, welcome home." She had married my father 7 months after my mother passed away. A whirlwind romance, she'd called it, at the time. I'd been too consumed by my own grief to question it. Now, seeing her in this hollowed-out version of my childhood home, a cold unease settled deep in my stomach. Dinner was, of course, perfect. Roasted chicken with rosemary, potatoes dauphinoise, asparagus spears aligned with geometric precision on the plate. It was a meal from a magazine, delicious but devoid of soul. "I'm so glad you decided to come back," Celia said, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. "It's been too quiet here. You can stay as long as you need." "Of course," she paused, taking a delicate sip of her wine. "And don't worry about work. I was talking to HR the other day. They always have openings at Northbridge. I can make an introduction, get you started." Northbridge Conveyance, the logistics giant that was the lifeblood of Braxton, the next town over. The company my father had devoted 30 years of his life to. The offer hung in the air. Slick and convenient, it was a lifeline, but it felt more like a leash. I forced a smile. "That's very generous of you." Celia. Later that night, unable to sleep, I wandered the silent house. The sterile cleanliness felt oppressive, a constant reminder of all that had been erased. I found myself standing outside my father's old office. My hand hesitated on the brass knob before I pushed the door open. The room was changed, but not entirely. His heavy oak desk was still there, but the clutter was gone. The shelves that once overflowed with books on maritime history and engineering were now sparsely decorated with neutral-toned vases and generic art prints. Celia's touch. A strange scent lingered in the air here, beneath the lemon polish, a faint whiff of chlorine, like a recently cleaned pool, and the unmistakable, earthy smell of damp wood. My eyes followed the scent to the floor, to the worn oriental rug that lay before the desk. I knelt, my fingers tracing the worn patterns, until they found the source. A single floorboard, just beneath the edge of the rug, was slightly raised. When I pulled the rug back, I could see it clearly. It didn't sit flush like the others. I wedged my fingernails into the seam and pried. It came up with a soft groan of old wood, and there, nestled in the shallow, dusty space of the subfloor, was the blue file folder from my first night home. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lifted it out. It was cool to the touch, the cardboard softened by time and dampness. Tucked beside it were two other items, a small, tarnished silver key, the kind used for a safe deposit box, and a postcard. The picture on the front was of the old Grayfield clock tower. I flipped it over. The address was written in my father's familiar, slanted script. It was addressed to me, at my college dormitory. It had never been sent. I sat back on my heels, the cold from the floor seeping through my pajamas. I carried the items back to my room, closing the door as quietly as possible. Under the weak lamplight of my bedside table, I opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a single sheet of paper, folded in half. It was a letter. Marin. If you're reading this, it means she's already changed the locks, metaphorically, I hope, but perhaps literally, too. Don't believe the stories about debt. Don't believe I would have sold my legacy for nothing. It was never about the money for them. It was about the shares. It was always about the shares. Be careful. Love. Dad. A tremor ran through my hand. She changed the locks. He had known. He had suspected something. My mind reeled, trying to fit this piece into the puzzle of his last few months, a time when he'd become withdrawn and quiet on our weekly calls. Beneath the letter was a sheaf of corporate documents. The centerpiece was a stock transfer agreement. It stated that Thomas Cole, my father, had sold his entire 18% stake in Northbridge Conveyance back to the company's treasury. The reason cited was to cover outstanding personal debts. The date was 3 weeks before his fatal heart attack. I stared at his signature on the bottom line. I knew his signature better than my own. This was close, but it was wrong. His was a confident, fluid loop. This one was hesitant, the ink slightly blurred and the angle slightly off-kilter, as if signed under duress or by an unsteady hand, or not his hand at all. Tucked between the pages of the agreement was a small, yellow sticky note. The handwriting was different, a tight, neat print. It contained just 5 words. Ask about the Foundry Fund. C? Foundry. The name meant nothing to me. And who was C? Not Celia. Her handwriting was a flowery, elaborate script. This was someone else. A friend? A whistleblower? I laid everything out on my bed. The cryptic letter, the suspicious agreement, the mysterious key, the unsent postcard, the note about a secret fund. 2 undeniable facts crystallized in my mind. First, my father's 18% stake in a multi-million-dollar company hadn't vanished to pay off debts. It had been taken. Second, Celia, the woman sleeping peacefully down the hall in my father's bed, had gone to great lengths to bury the proof. Her offer of a job at Northbridge was no longer an act of generosity. It was an act of surveillance. She wanted to keep me close, to manage me, to ensure I never got curious. A cold, hard clarity washed over me, displacing the grief and confusion that had clouded my thoughts for the past year. My return to Grayfield was no longer a retreat. My new degree wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a tool. I was trained to analyze systems, to find inefficiencies, to follow the paper trail. I picked up my phone. The screen illuminated my face in the dark room. I opened my email and found the message Celia had sent me earlier that evening with the subject line, Intro at Northbridge. It contained the email address for the head of human resources. My fingers moved across the screen, my resolve hardening with each tap. I would accept her offer. I would walk through the doors of Northbridge Conveyance and smile and thank her for the opportunity. I would be the dutiful, grieving daughter, the recent graduate just trying to get her start. But I wouldn't be there to express my gratitude. I would be there to burn her empire to the ground. The Northbridge Conveyance Tower was a shard of smoked glass and steel thrust into the heart of downtown Braxton. It was the kind of building that reflected the sky but let nothing of its own interior show. In the polished granite lobby, the company's motto was etched in silver letters 3 feet high. We move what matters. I wondered if that included stolen legacies and buried secrets. Celia met me by the security turnstiles, looking every bit the high-powered executive in a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my first semester of tuition. She handed me a flimsy plastic card with my photo, my name, and the word temporary printed in bold red. "Your pass, darling," she said, her voice a smooth, practiced melody. "You'll be starting as a supply chain intern, reporting to the logistics floor. It's best to start from the bottom. Learn the ropes from the ground up." Her smile was a masterpiece of condescension disguised as encouragement. She was placing me in the basement of the corporate hierarchy. Somewhere she assumed I could do no harm. It was her first mistake. "Thank you, Celia. I appreciate the opportunity," I said, my voice carefully neutral. I clipped the badge to my shirt. It felt like putting on a costume. The logistics floor was a sprawling open-plan office, a sea of gray cubicles under the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. It smelled of stale coffee and industrial-grade carpet cleaner. Celia glided me through the aisles, introducing me to a floor manager who then passed me off to my designated guide, a guy named Beck. Beck was lanky, with a perpetually tired expression and a faded band t-shirt visible under his unbuttoned plaid shirt. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He gave me a lazy, two-fingered wave. "Marin, right? Welcome to the data mines." As he gave me the tour, my senses were on high alert. I wasn't just looking at a new workplace. I was casing a crime scene. I noted the sweep of the security cameras in the adjoining warehouse staging area, mapping their paths in my mind, identifying the blind spot behind a stack of shipping pallets near the loading bay door. As we walked past a row of data analysts, one of them, a woman with a severe haircut, flinched when she saw me approaching and quickly minimized a window on her dual-screen setup. It had been a complex-looking spreadsheet, full of colored cells. She was hiding something. I filed the observation away. Beck led me to my designated cubicle, a featureless box with a second-hand monitor and a sticky keyboard. He leaned against the partition, lowering his voice. "All right, here's the real tour," he murmured. "Coffee in the break room is sludge. Vending machine on the 3rd floor has the good chips. And whatever you do, avoid the 19th floor." "The 19th floor?" I asked, feigning simple curiosity. "Executive row," he said, rolling his eyes. "C-suite, legal, and the black box. It's where they run the internal projects fund, special disbursements, off-book acquisitions. That's the rumor. Anyway, access is keycard only, and they don't give those out to us mortals." "Ask about the Foundry Fund." The words from the yellow sticky note echoed in my head. A black box, a special fund, on the 19th floor. It was a direct hit. My assigned task was as mind-numbing as Celia had surely intended. I was given read-only access to a slice of the company's enterprise resource planning system and tasked with data sanitation. My job was to cross-reference shipping invoices from the last 2 years with their corresponding bills of lading, flagging any discrepancies for review. It was tedious, soul-crushing work, designed to bury me in irrelevant information. But a supply chain is a story. Every number, every date, every signature tells you something. I spent the first few days learning the rhythm of the data, the normal patterns of Northbridge's global operations, and then I started looking for the things that broke the pattern. It was on the 3rd day that I found it. A series of duplicate lot numbers, identical shipments of recycled industrial components sent out on different dates to the same receiving address. In logistics, duplicating a lot number is like giving 2 different people the same social security number. It doesn't happen by accident. It's a deliberate act, a way to move something off the books by hiding it inside a legitimate-looking transaction. I dug deeper, pulling the associated expense reports. The costs for these ghost shipments weren't coded to a specific project or department. Instead, they were listed under a generic line item. Operational adjustment. It was financial camouflage. And then, in the comments section of a quarterly budget summary memo, I saw the word I was looking for. A senior manager was questioning the rising adjustment costs, and in the reply thread, a controller had written, These are standard disbursements from the Foundry Protocol to cover asset depreciation. Foundry, not a fund, a protocol, a system, a mechanism for making money disappear into thin air. My hands felt cold. I was close. I could feel it. That afternoon, an email popped up in my inbox. The sender was Celia Gray. The subject line was blank. The body of the message was just one sentence. I hope you're settling in well. Keep your head down, focus on your work, and don't ask too many questions. The threat was unmistakable, wrapped in the thinnest veil of corporate politeness. She was watching me. She knew I was here, and she was warning me off. I took a slow, steadying breath. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I typed back a simple, sterile reply. Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I never called her mom, not once, not even in the beginning when my father had pleaded with me to try. Some part of me had always known she was an interloper, a placeholder who didn't belong. Now I knew she was a thief. I worked through the rest of the day, my mind racing, connecting the duplicate lot numbers to the Foundry Protocol, connecting Foundry to the 19th floor, and connecting it all back to the fraudulent signature on my father's stock agreement. Celia hadn't just stolen his shares. She had been using the company as her own personal slush fund. My father must have discovered it, and she must have silenced him. The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the office's overzealous air conditioning. This was bigger than corporate fraud. Just as I was packing up to leave, my personal phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from an unknown number. Hey, it's Beck. You work late? I hesitated before typing back. Sometimes, why? The reply came a second later. There's a skeleton crew running an inventory audit at the Riverside warehouse tonight. Overtime. Things get a little less corporate out there. Want to come see what the ghost of the 19th floor actually does? The Riverside warehouse, one of the destinations for the ghost shipments of recycled industrial components. The ghost of the 19th floor. He was offering me a look behind the curtain. He had no idea how badly I wanted to see it. My fingers flew across the screen. I'm in. The next morning, I approached my floor manager with a carefully constructed request. I'm finding a lot of invoice mismatches that I think are just data entry errors, I explained, projecting an image of earnest diligence. If I had read only access to the vendor master files, I could cross-reference the addresses and confirm them myself. It would speed up my flagging process considerably. He barely looked up from his monitor, grunted an affirmative, and tapped a few keys. Just like that, another door creaked open. With my expanded access, I wasn't just looking at individual invoices anymore. I was mapping the entire ecosystem of Northbridge's payables. The duplicate lot numbers for recycled industrial components all led to the same destination, an address in a semi-abandoned industrial park on the other side of the state. The recipient was a company I'd never heard of, Gray Foundry, LLC. A quick search confirmed my suspicions. Gray Foundry, LLC had no website, no public presence, no business listings beyond the state's bare-bones incorporation filing. It was a ghost, a classic shell company designed to receive funds and disappear them. The name was a brazen piece of arrogance. Gray, as in Celia Gray. She had put her own name on the weapon. I dove into the ERP system's change logs, a digital ledger of every keystroke and modification. It was the system's memory, following the trail of the Gray Foundry shipments. I found the pattern. On the last business day of every month, a single user logged in after hours and performed a batch edit, overwriting the shipment descriptions and rerouting the cost codes to the generic operational adjustment ledger. The user ID wasn't a person's name. It was CFO Proxy, a cutout account. Designed for deniability, it was Celia's digital ghost, cleaning up her tracks. Knowing the user ID was like having a key, I started searching the company's shared network drives, looking for any files created or modified by CFO Proxy. Most were encrypted financial reports, inaccessible to me, but one file, buried deep in a folder for quarterly procedural updates, caught my eye. It was a PDF named SOPQ3.pdf, Standard Operating Procedure, Quarter 3. It was deliberately boring, a needle hidden in a haystack of corporate jargon, but the last modified by field read CFO proxy. I downloaded the file to a sandboxed virtual machine on my laptop, isolating it from the network. The document itself was 20 pages of dense, meaningless flowcharts. It was a decoy. The real information wasn't in what the document showed, but in what it was. In the world of digital forensics, every file has a fingerprint. It's called metadata, data about the data. I wrote a simple macro, a few lines of code to strip the PDF down to its core properties and export them to a text file. I hit enter, and the result flashed onto my screen. My breath caught in my chest. Original file name, Statement of Beneficial Ownership, PDF. Author, T. Cole. T. Cole, Thomas Cole, my father. He had created this document. Celia hadn't just buried it. She had renamed it, skinned it, and left its corpse in a digital mass grave. A statement of beneficial ownership was a legal document used to declare the true owner of an asset or company, especially when held by a proxy. My father was investigating Gray Foundry. The pieces were slotting into place with terrifying speed. I went back to the blue folder, to the stock transfer agreement I'd found under the floorboards. In the office, I had access to software my father had used. I scanned the document, focusing on the signature block. It had a faint, pixelated watermark behind it. A digital signature certificate. A tool used to verify the authenticity and time of a document's signing. Using a public key verification tool, I analyzed the certificate's embedded timestamp. The digital signature, the final, unalterable authentication of the document, had been applied at 11:42 p.m. on a Tuesday. The date printed on the agreement, the one with my father's forged ink signature, was from the preceding Sunday. My father had died on Monday morning. This document, the legal instrument that had stripped him of his life's work, had been electronically finalized nearly 48 hours after his heart had stopped beating. It was the coldest, hardest proof I could have imagined. This wasn't just fraud, it was a desecration. My hands were shaking. I closed the laptop and walked to the break room to get a coffee I didn't want, just needing to move, to breathe air that wasn't thick with the ghosts of digital files. Beck was there, stirring a packet of sugar into a styrofoam cup. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, not unkindly. "Something like that," I managed. He took a sip of his coffee and grimaced. "Speaking of ghosts, you ever hear about Harper Dade?" The name was unfamiliar. "No. Who's that?" "Internal auditor. Real stickler for the rules. About a year ago, he was heading up a big review of our subsidiary accounts. Then, poof, gone." Beck snapped his fingers. "One day he's here, the next his desk is cleared out. Official story was a family emergency, resigned to move back home, but the rumor was he found something on the 19th floor. He pushed too hard, and they pushed him out." An alarm bell went off in my head. I pulled out my phone, scrolling back through my personal calendar, my fingers flying. A year ago, I found the date range Beck was talking about. My blood ran cold. The week Harper Dade resigned was the same week Celia had married my father. She had secured her position in his life and then, in the same 7-day span, eliminated a threat within the company. She was tying up loose ends, securing her flank before she moved on her primary target, Dad's 18% share. 7 months after my mother died, she married him. A year later, he was dead, and his legacy was hers. I had to get to the 19th floor. I had to see what was there. That afternoon, fueled by a cold rage, I took the main elevator. I pressed the button for 19. It didn't light up. A key icon glowed next to it. When the elevator stopped at 18, I got out and walked to the fire stairs. The door to the 19th floor landing was locked, requiring a keycard swipe from the inside. Dead end. I went back down and walked to the executive elevator bank, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I held my breath and swiped my temporary intern badge against the panel. The reader beeped once, a shrill, mocking sound. A small light next to it flashed an angry, definitive red. Access denied, of course. Defeated. I turned away. Beck was standing 20 feet away, pretending to inspect a fire extinguisher. He caught my eye and gave a subtle jerk of his head toward the back corridor, the one that led to the loading bays and service areas. I followed him. He led me to a grimy, unmarked metal door, a freight elevator. It was scuffed and smelled of grease and ozone. He swiped his own badge, a much more robust-looking one with a maintenance department hologram. The panel beeped. The light flashed green. The heavy doors groaned open. "Maintenance gets all access," he said with a wry smile. "Comes in handy." He looked at the panel inside. "They usually have this floor locked out on the service lift. 2. He tapped the button for 19. It lit up, a brilliant, permissive white. Beck frowned. "Huh, that's weird." He looked at me. Someone must have left the override on. The doors slid shut, and with a heavy lurch, the elevator began to rise. The Riverside warehouse wasn't just a building. It was a vast metal cavern on the industrial outskirts of Braxton, where the city's ambition petered out into rust and weeds. The air that hit me when Beck pried open a side door was a physical shock, a wall of cold that smelled sharply of new plastic, machine oil, and the damp, metallic tang of the nearby river. It was the temperature of a meat locker, designed to preserve, not to welcome. Beck flicked on a row of humming overhead lights, casting long, distorted shadows down aisles of steel shelving stacked high with pallets. "Audit crew is working the West Wing tonight," he said, his voice a low cloud in the frigid air. "We've got the East Bay to ourselves for a couple of hours. This is where the special handling shipments come through." My eyes scanned the rows. Most pallets were neatly shrink-wrapped, bearing standard Northbridge logistics labels. But my attention was drawn to a cluster of crates set apart from the others, near a loading bay door that was sealed shut. These were different. They were made of rough, unfinished wood, and the labels were simpler, almost generic. I walked toward one. The manifest tucked into a plastic sleeve was handwritten, "Item description: scrap motors, for recycling." It listed a gross weight of 800 pounds. Something was wrong. I was an intern, but I had spent the last 4 years studying the physics of logistics. I knew what a pallet of scrap electric motors looked like, how it sat. This crate was too small for that weight. Or the weight was wrong. I put my shoulder against the edge of the wooden pallet and pushed. It didn't budge. It was like trying to move a block of solid steel. It had to be well over double the listed weight. Beck came over, frowning. He tried as well, his boots skidding on the smooth concrete floor. "No way this is 800 pounds, he muttered, rubbing his hands together for warmth. "What the hell?" He found a crowbar leaning against a support pillar. With a sharp crack, the wood splintered. He pried up a plank. Inside, nestled in a bed of dense foam, was not scrap metal. It was a neat, tight array of sleek, black machines. They were brand new, high-frequency RFID scanners. The top-of-the-line model used for automated inventory tracking in high-security facilities. I knew the model. A single unit cost more than my car. There were at least 50 of them in the crate. This wasn't scrap. This was a high-value technology shipment, worth a fortune. More importantly, I recognized the country of origin on the manufacturer's label. Importing them without declaring them properly would be a way to evade substantial tariffs. Taped to the inside of the crate's lid was a clear plastic envelope. My fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the seal. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a Northbridge invoice. It was a payment confirmation from a third-party vendor, an import-export firm based in the Cayman Islands. It confirmed receipt of payment for logistics consultation services, and at the bottom of the page, in the section detailing the source of funds, were the words I was hunting for. "Paid in full via wire transfer from the Foundry Fund." Stamped next to it, a digital seal, sharp and clear, a stylized CG, Celia Gray. This was it, the physical manifestation of the digital ghosts in the ERP system. Gray Foundry LLC was the shell company, and the Foundry Fund was the bank account that fueled it, laundering money through overpriced, mislabeled, and undeclared shipments. My training kicked in, a cold, methodical calm settling over my racing heart. I pulled out my phone. "Keep watch," I told Beck, my voice tight. He nodded, his face pale in the harsh light, and moved toward the door. The shutter clicks of my phone's camera sounded like gunshots in the vast, silent warehouse. I photographed the crate, the scanners, the manifest, and every angle of the payment confirmation, ensuring Celia's digital seal was in sharp focus. I switched to video, doing a slow, 360-degree pan to establish the location, the pallet number, everything. On the floor beside the crate, I spotted a small, white plastic tag with a red wire threaded through it, a high-security tamper seal, the kind used on international freight. It had been snipped and discarded. I picked it up. A serial number was printed in tiny black letters. I didn't even need to check. I knew with absolute certainty that this number would match one of the ghost invoices, one of the shipments of recycled industrial components logged by CFO Proxy. I slipped it into my pocket. It felt heavy, like a piece of shrapnel. As I stood up, my boot kicked something that skittered under the steel shelving unit. I knelt, using my phone's flashlight to see. It was an old employee ID badge, half covered in dust and grime. I reached under and pulled it out, wiping it clean on my jeans. The photo showed a man with tired eyes and a neat professional haircut. The name printed below it made the air freeze in my lungs. Harper Dade, Internal Audit. He had been here. The missing auditor hadn't just been pushed out. He had been in this warehouse. He had found this operation. My mind flashed to his sudden resignation, his cleared-out desk. It wasn't a family emergency. He had been silenced. I flipped the badge over. A phone number was written on a small sticker on the back. A personal cell. Probably. I stepped away from the crate, my back to the shelves, and dialed the number. I listened to it ring. Once, twice, a third time. Then, a click, not voicemail, a flat, synthesized voice. "The number you have dialed is not in service. Please check the number and try again." A cold dread, deeper than the chill of the room, settled in my stomach. People don't just disappear. Their phone numbers get disconnected. I turned back to the shelving unit, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, and that's when I saw it. It was faint, almost invisible, written in what looked like white chalk on the dark gray steel of an upright support beam. Right at eye level, it wasn't a word, but an equation. 19 equals trust deed. 19 equals trust deed. It was a message, a clue left behind by Harper Dade. He must have scrawled it in his last moments here, a final breadcrumb for whoever might follow. He was telling me what he'd found, or what he was looking for. The 19th floor, the black box. It wasn't just a slush fund, it was structured. A trust deed is a legal document, a formal instrument used to place assets into a trust, managed by a trustee for a beneficiary. Celia had created a formal legal structure to control the stolen assets. The paperwork, the very heart of the conspiracy, was on the 19th floor. Beck reappeared at the end of the aisle. "We should go. The auditors are packing up." I nodded, my mind a whirlwind. We put the wooden plank back on the crate, a flimsy cover for a massive crime. As we walked toward the exit, I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out the small notebook I carried. Tucked inside was the one piece of evidence that wasn't digital, that wasn't forensic. It was the small, yellow sticky note from the file under the floorboards, the one with the tight, neat print from the unknown C. "Ask about the Foundry Fund. C." I looked at it, then at the chalk-white equation on the steel beam. Two ghosts, Harper Dade and my father, were speaking to me, pointing me in the same direction. They had both found the truth, and they had both been stopped. I slipped the note back into my book. It was a promise. I wasn't just exposing a crime anymore. I was finishing what they had started, back in the sterile quiet of my room. The adrenaline from the warehouse faded, leaving behind a hollow ache. The evidence I'd gathered was cold and digital, a collection of data points and pixels. I needed to reconnect with the reason why, with the flesh and blood man they had erased. I opened the blue folder again, my fingers tracing the familiar slant of my father's handwriting on the letter. If you're reading this, don't believe the stories about debt. They want the shares, not the money. His words were no longer a cryptic warning. They were a direct accusation. He had known he was being cornered. He wasn't a victim of circumstance. He was a target. The letter was his final, desperate attempt to arm me. Tucked behind it was the postcard he'd never mailed, and behind that, something I had overlooked in my initial shock, a 4x6 photograph. It was from my graduation day the year before. I was standing in front of the university library, beaming, holding my diploma like a trophy. I remembered sending it to him, so proud. I flipped it over. His handwriting filled the back. My brilliant Marin, so proud of you today and always. I wanted to frame this for my desk. Below that, a second, more hurried script was added. Celia wouldn't let me send this back to you. Said it would just make you sad. Remind you of what you were missing at home. I think she was wrong. A wave of nausea washed over me. It was an act of such casual, profound cruelty. To intercept a moment of shared joy and twist it into a tool of isolation. She hadn't just stolen his company. She had actively worked to sever the connection between us in his final months, curating his communications, managing his emotions, cutting him off from his only family until he was completely alone with her. With this new, bitter understanding, I looked again at the stock transfer agreement. I spread it flat on my desk, the forged signature looking more grotesque than ever. It wasn't just the slight wobble or the unnatural angle, it was the breaks in the ink. My father wrote his name in a single, fluid motion. This signature was constructed in pieces, a careful, hesitant drawing of a name. Not the confident scrawl of its owner. It was the signature of a man under extreme duress, or one whose hand was being guided, or one who was already gone. My eyes fell on the last item from the folder, the small, tarnished silver key. I had tried it on every lock in the house. The old filing cabinet, the liquor cabinet, a small lockbox of my mother's. Nothing. It didn't belong here. It had to belong to the one place that was his sanctuary and his battlefield, his office at Northbridge. The next day, I found Beck by the sludge-producing coffee machine. I kept my tone casual, the dutiful intern making conversation. It's weird, seeing the new innovation hub on the 6th floor. I remember when that used to be the senior logistics offices. My dad's was in that wing. Beck nodded, dumping a third sugar packet into his cup. Yeah, they gutted it last year. Total makeover, beanbag chairs and whiteboard walls, the whole 9 yards. Most of the old stuff got tossed. What about the heavy furniture? I asked, a carefully placed probe. Like those old steel safes they used to build into the walls. They wouldn't have ripped those out, would they? He paused, thinking. Nah, you're right. Too much trouble. Most of them are still there. Just drywalled over or hidden behind some stupid motivational poster. Why? No reason, I said with a shrug. Just remembering. That night, we planned it. It wasn't a break-in. Not really. It was a creative use of resources. Beck logged a late-night maintenance request to recalibrate the HVAC sensors on the 6th floor. A job that would give him legitimate access to the entire wing for hours. He swapped his shift with a guy on the night crew, a simple exchange that would go unnoticed. He would be my key and my lookout. At 10 p.m., the Innovation Hub was a ghost town, an eerie space bathed in the blue glow of network activity lights. The bright primary colors of the beanbag chairs and the upbeat corporate slogans on the walls felt absurdly cheerful in the silence. His office was the corner one, I whispered, pointing down a hall of glass-walled conference rooms, overlooking the Braxton Bridge. We found it. The space had been converted into a synergy lounge, a large abstract canvas painting, all gray and blue, Celia's favorite colors, hung on the main wall. It was the only wall without a window. I ran my hands over it. It was mounted on a block, set out an inch from the wall. Behind it, my knuckles hit solid steel. Beck used a utility knife to carefully cut the mounting wires. We lifted the painting down, revealing a square, flush-mounted safe door with a small, key-operated lock. It was exactly like the one my father had in his office at home for years. My hand was steady as I inserted the small silver key from the folder. It slid in perfectly. I turned it, with a low, satisfying thunk. The tumblers aligned, the handle turned, and the heavy door swung open. The safe wasn't empty. It contained a single, leather-bound portfolio. My heart hammered in my chest. I lifted it out and carried it to a conference table. Inside was a document, professionally bound. The title on the cover page read, "Codicil to the Shareholder Agreement of Thomas Cole." It was a corporate directive, not a personal will. In it, my father used his rights as a founding shareholder to establish a protective clause over his 18% stake, in the event of his incapacitation or death. The voting rights and beneficiary status of his shares were not to pass to his spouse, but were to be held in trust, with me, Marin Cole, designated as the sole protector and future beneficiary upon my 28th birthday. He had signed it a month before he married Celia. He had built a firewall to protect his legacy from her, and she had found a way to burn it down anyway. Tucked into the back sleeve of the portfolio was the final piece of evidence, the one that connected everything. It was a single sheet of paper, a printed email. My eyes scanned the header. From Celia. Gray, Northbridge, com. To tcole@northbridge, com. Date, the Sunday before he died. Subject, syncing the dates. The body of the email was short and chillingly casual. Tom. Just got off the phone with legal. For the Treasury buyback to be seamless, the signed paper agreement needs to be dated prior to the final digital transfer. Let's date it for today. It's cleaner that way. No one will question it. C. I read it twice, 3 times. The casual manipulation, the directive to backdate a document. She had convinced him it was a routine corporate transaction, a Treasury buyback, while planning to use the post-dated digital signature to finalize it after he was gone. The forged signature, the backdating, the 48-hour gap. It was all here, in an email she thought was long since deleted. I finally understood the full scope of her ambition. It wasn't just about the money from the Foundry Fund. It was about control. My father's 18% stake was a critical voting bloc on the Northbridge board. With it, she could challenge the CEO, install her own people, and seize total control of the company's direction. She hadn't just stolen from my father. She was in the process of staging a slow-motion corporate coup. I took a photo of every single page with my phone, my movements precise and automatic. My grief had burned away, leaving behind a cold, hard certainty. I could take this all to the police, the forged signature, the post-dated digital certificate, this email. It was more than enough, but that felt too simple, too quiet. A police investigation would be slow, tied up in legal challenges for years. Celia would deploy an army of lawyers. The truth could be buried under a mountain of motions and delays. No, she didn't deserve the quiet dignity of a courtroom. She had orchestrated a public theft, hidden behind corporate veils. She needed to be exposed in the same arena. Her power came from her position, her reputation, her control of the company's narrative. I wouldn't just take that away from her. I would let her watch as I dismantled it, piece by piece, in front of the very people whose validation she craved: the board, the shareholders, and the market. Northbridge's quarterly earnings call was next week, a moment of maximum corporate vulnerability, when the company's health would be laid bare for all to see. It was the perfect stage. I slid the portfolio back into the safe. We hung the painting, leaving everything exactly as we had found it, walking out of the silent innovation hub. I didn't feel like a grieving daughter anymore. I felt like a strategist, and I had just found my casus belli. The week of the quarterly earnings call was a study in controlled tension. In the open plan office, you could almost taste the anxiety in the stale, recycled air. Northbridge had narrowly missed its projections the previous 2 quarters, and the stock had been punished for it. The board, the analysts, the investors. Everyone was desperate for good news. A a strong forecast to stop the bleeding. The company's entire public face was at its most sensitive, its skin stretched thin and taut. A single, well-placed pinprick could tear it all open. My strategy was not to be a pinprick, it was to be a scalpel. The plan unfolded in a series of precise, interlocking steps, a quiet campaign waged from a gray cubicle and a burner phone. First, the bait, T-5 days. Using a public library computer and a secure VPN, I created an anonymous, encrypted email account. I uploaded a curated selection of the evidence to a cloud storage folder. The video from the warehouse, a high-resolution photo of the payment confirmation bearing Celia's digital CG seal, the metadata analysis showing my father as the original author of the SOPQ3 file, and the timestamp report from the stock transfer's digital signature, clearly showing it was finalized 2 days after my father's death. I did not include the email from Celia or the codicil from the safe. This was just the appetizer, enough to get them to the table. I drafted a short, sterile message and sent it to the personal email addresses of the 3 members of the Northbridge Audit Committee, including its chairman. Subject: Urgent matter for pre-call board review. Attached is a link to a secure folder containing documents and media pertaining to undisclosed off-book liabilities and potential malfeasance related to the Foundry Fund and the Office of the CFO. I have scheduled a meeting for 8:00 a.m. on the morning of the earnings call in Braxton Hall to present the full context. Your attendance is not just requested, it is essential to your fiduciary duty. There was no signature. The message was a command disguised as a warning. They would have no choice but to attend. Next, the misdirection. T-3 days. I sent a text to Celia's personal phone. Celia, do you have a minute for coffee before work on the morning of the call? Say 7:30? I've been thinking a lot, and I've decided Northbridge isn't the right fit for me. I'd like to leave on good terms and was hoping I could ask you for a letter of recommendation. It was the perfect lure. To her, it would read as a capitulation. The little intern, overwhelmed and scared off by her warning, was retreating with her tail between her legs. It would flatter her ego and, more importantly, it would place her exactly where I wanted her at a critical moment, out of her office, away from her allies, and completely unaware of the meeting I had just summoned with the audit committee. Her reply came back within a minute. Of course, darling. Bright Cup Cafe at 7:30 it is. Third, the stage. Beck was my inside man. He filed a low-priority IT ticket for 7:00 a.m. on the day of the call, citing a flickering projector bulb and faulty audio connection in Braxton Hall, the large, formal conference room reserved for board meetings. It gave him a legitimate reason to be in the room alone an hour before my meeting, using his maintenance-level admin access on the room's dedicated computer. He added my temporary user profile to the list of accounts with presentation privileges, a small, simple change that would be invisible to anyone not looking for it. The stage was set. Fourth, the legal declaration, T-2 days. I walked into the hushed, carpeted offices of the corporate secretary on the 18th floor. I was no longer an anonymous tipster. I was Marin Cole, daughter of Thomas Cole. I presented the original codicil from my father's safe, its pages crisp, his signature a familiar, defiant blue. I am formally submitting this directive as per the corporate bylaws, I stated to the bewildered legal assistant. I am petitioning for the immediate confirmation of my status as beneficiary protector for the 18% share block held by the estate of Thomas Cole, pending a full review of its recent transfer. The move sent a shockwave through the legal department. It was a formal, on-the-record challenge. News would travel up the chain of command, directly to Celia, but she wouldn't know what prompted it or what I had found in the safe. She would see it as a desperate, uninformed grasp for money. She would underestimate me. Her text message arrived an hour later, the tone stripped of its usual false sweetness. It was cold, hard, and direct. Don't make a mess, Marin. The company needs unity right now. I stood by the window in the logistics office, looking down at the city below. The cars were like blood cells moving through the arteries of Braxton, all part of a system. Just like this company. I type my reply, my fingers steady. I agree. Unity is important. Let's unify around the truth. Finally, the insurance policies, T-minus 24 hours, I purchased a specific type of USB drive, a write once, read many model, meaning that once the data was on it, it could not be altered or deleted. I copied everything: the warehouse evidence, the documents from my father's safe, the email from Celia, the stock agreement, every photo, every file. I created a complete, unalterable record of the entire crime. I put the drive in a padded envelope and took it to a courier service. The recipient was a man named Alan Croft, a semi-retired independent attorney in a dusty office 2 towns over, far from the influence of Northbridge's corporate law firms. He was a pit bull my father had once used in a zoning dispute years ago. The instructions were simple: hold the package in trust and open it only upon my direct instruction, or if I failed to contact him by an agreed-upon date. My last act of preparation was the quietest and the most grim. On a plain white index card, I wrote a simple instruction in block letters. If I do not check in by 10:02 a.m., deliver the contents of this envelope to Jessica Riley at the Braxton Ledger. I sealed the card in an envelope along with a second USB drive, the twin of the one I sent to the lawyer. This wasn't for theatrical effect. It wasn't a dramatic flourish. It was a practical necessity born of a cold assessment of my opponent. I had seen what happened to Harper Dade. I knew my father had died with shocking convenience. Celia was not a woman who played by the rules when cornered. She was a predator who eliminated threats. My confrontation with her was not a corporate negotiation. It was a cage match, and I had to assume she would be willing to do anything to win. This note was my dead man's switch. It was my guarantee that, whether I walked out of Braxton Hall or not, the truth would. I placed the envelope in the inside pocket of the blazer I would wear the next morning. The pieces were all in place. The trap was set. The board was expecting a financial report. They were about to get a reckoning. The air inside Bright Cup Cafe was thick with the smells of burnt coffee and steamed milk. Condensation traced lazy rivers down the large plate glass windows, blurring the gray morning outside into a watercolor wash. I was there first, seated in a small booth in the back, my untouched mug of black coffee growing cold in my hands. It was 7:26 a.m. At precisely 7:28, the door opened, and Celia swept in. She wore an ivory-colored trench coat, belted tightly at the waist, a slash of impeccable color against the dreary backdrop. Her movements were economical and precise as she scanned the cafe, her eyes landing on me without a flicker of surprise. She slid into the booth opposite me, placing her leather briefcase on the seat beside her. The air around her shifted, subtly scented with a perfume that was expensive, floral, and utterly cold. "Marin," she said. Her smile was a perfect, polished veneer. "You wanted to talk." "Thank you for meeting me," I began, my voice even, betraying none of the frantic energy coursing through my veins. "I wanted to tell you in person. I'm going to be putting in my notice. I've decided Northbridge isn't the right fit for me." She tilted her head, a gesture of feigned sympathy. "Oh, darling, I'm so sorry to hear that. Is it the work? We could find you something more challenging." "It's not the work," I said, looking directly into her cool blue eyes. "It's the culture. Specifically, the culture on the 19th floor. I don't think I'm a good fit for it." The smile didn't falter, but something behind her eyes hardened. A shutter dropped. "The 19th floor holds sensitive corporate materials. Marin, financial strategies, proprietary contracts. It's not a place for interns to be curious about. A smart girl like you should understand the importance of discretion." It was a warning, delivered with the placid calm of a surgeon discussing an incision. I let the silence hang for a beat. Then, I reached into my coat pocket. My movements were slow, deliberate. I placed 2 items on the polished surface of the table, midway between her coffee and mine. The first was the small, red-wired, plastic tamper seal I had found on the floor of the warehouse. The second was the grimy, discarded ID badge of Harper Dade. Her face, a carefully constructed mask of serene control, finally broke. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible reaction, a fractional tightening of the muscles around her jaw, a flicker in her eyes that was too fast to be anything but pure, animal instinct. It lasted less than a second. Then, the mask was back in place, even more perfect than before. She let out a small, airy laugh. Really, Marin, what is this? Playing detective with company trash? It's childish. My phone had been on the table the entire time. Screen down, my thumb, hidden beneath the table's edge, had already pressed the record button on a voice memo app. This was the moment. It's about the Foundry Fund, I said, my voice dropping to a near whisper. She leaned forward slightly, her own voice lowering to a conspiratorial hush. The public setting was my shield. She wouldn't cause a scene. She would try to manage me. All right, enough games, she said, her tone a mix of exasperation and condescension. You've found something you don't understand. The Foundry is a corporate protection structure, a perfectly legal one. It allows the company to move assets efficiently, to protect us from idiotic tax liabilities on certain international imports. It's business. It's complicated. It's a shell company, I countered, my voice flat. Gray Foundry LLC. It launders money through mislabeled shipments of undeclared, high-value tech. Her eyes narrowed. You have a vivid imagination, and you've been listening to gossip. Your father understood these things. He understood that sometimes, to protect the company, you have to operate in the gray areas. He signed off on everything. Marin, every single transfer. He signed it all because he loved me, and he trusted me to protect his legacy. It was a near-perfect confession, wrapped in the language of corporate necessity and sentimental manipulation. She was admitting to the fund, the imports, and my father's involvement, all while framing it as a prudent, if slightly unorthodox, business strategy that he had fully endorsed. I held her gaze, my heart a steady, cold drum in my chest. He trusted you? I asked quietly. Did he trust you to finalize the sale of his entire life's work the day after he died? Silence. The cafe's ambient noise, the hiss of the milk frother, the low murmur of another conversation, rushed in to fill the vacuum she had created. The color drained from her face, leaving 2 sharp spots of blush high on her cheekbones. The smile was gone. The condescension was gone. For the first time, I was seeing the real Celia Gray, and she was afraid. She leaned far across the table, her face just inches from mine. Her voice was a venomous hiss, stripped of all its polished charm. What do you want? I didn't answer. Delete it, she commanded, her eyes flicking to my phone. Delete whatever you think you have, right now, walk away. Northbridge will hire you, permanently, a real job, a management track position, a salary you can't even imagine. Your father's shares. We can discuss a trust for you, a generous one. This all goes away. It was the offer of a lifetime. The price was my father's memory. The price was the truth. I slowly pulled my phone off the table. I stopped the recording and slid the device into my pocket. I stood up, my chair making a soft scraping sound on the floor. I looked down at her, at this woman who had dismantled my family with a series of signatures and lies. 8 o'clock, I said, my voice clear and steady. Braxton Hall. I'll see you there. I turned and walked away, leaving her sitting alone in the booth with her lies and the 2 small pieces of plastic that would bring her world crashing down. I pushed through the glass door and stepped out into the cold morning air. The damp chill hit my face, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. I held up my hands in front of me. For the first time in a year, they weren't shaking. Braxton Hall was a room built for intimidation. The mahogany table was a dark, polished lake stretching 30 feet, flanked by high-backed black leather chairs. At one end, a triptych of 80-inch screens formed a seamless digital wall. The air was cool, still, and smelled faintly of leather and power. It was 7:59 a.m. The 3 members of the audit committee were already seated, stone-faced and severe. Beside them were the company's general counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Evelyn Thorne, and the lead partner from Northbridge's independent auditing firm, a man whose expression was permanently pinched with professional skepticism. They were a tribunal in bespoke suits, and they were all looking at me as I stood at the presenter's podium. A temporary intern badge clipped to my simple black blazer. The door opened with a soft click. Celia entered. She was a vision of defiance. Her lipstick was a slash of crimson. Her hair was flawless, and her eyes, fixed forward, did not blink. She didn't look at me. She moved to her customary seat at the right hand of the committee chairman, placed her tablet on the table with a soft, definitive tap, and folded her hands. She was projecting an aura of bored authority, as if this were a trivial interruption she had to graciously endure. "Thank you for your time," I began, my voice amplified slightly by the room's microphone. It sounded clearer, steadier than I felt. "My name is Marin Cole. As part of my data sanitation duties in the logistics department, I was tasked with reconciling historic shipping invoices. I found some minor discrepancies I felt obligated to bring to your attention." I clicked the remote in my hand. The first slide appeared on the massive screens. It was a simple spreadsheet showing a list of duplicate lot numbers. A low murmur rippled through the auditors. "As you can see," I continued, my tone that of a diligent student presenting a term project, "we have multiple shipments logged under identical lot IDs, all consigned to an entity called Gray Foundry LLC." Click. The next slide showed the shell company's incorporation document. The address was a PEO box. The registered agent was a firm in Wilmington, Delaware, known for creating anonymous corporate structures. Further analysis of the ERP's change logs revealed that the descriptions for these shipments were routinely overwritten at the end of each fiscal month. Click. The screen now displayed a log file. A single user ID was highlighted in yellow, repeated dozens of times. The edits were all made by a single user, CFO Proxy. Celia's composure remained flawless, but I saw her fingers tighten on her tablet. The chairman of the committee leaned forward, his eyes narrowed. One of these modified files was a quarterly procedure update. Click. The decoy document. SOP Q3 PDF appeared. It seemed innocuous, but a simple metadata analysis revealed its original properties. Click. The metadata flashed onto the screen in stark white text on a black background. Original file name, Statement of Beneficial Ownership, PDF. Author, T. Cole. A sharp intake of breath came from the general counsel. My father's name hung in the silent room. The most significant discrepancy, however, relates to the transfer of my father's 18% share block. Click. Two documents appeared side by side. On the left, a high-resolution scan of the stock transfer agreement with its hesitant, forged signature. On the right, the digital certificate verification report. I used a laser pointer to circle two dates. The paper agreement is dated for a Sunday. My father passed away the following day. Monday. The document's unalterable digital signature, however, shows it was finalized at 11:42 p.m. on Tuesday. I let the words sink in. This document, the legal instrument that transferred control of nearly a fifth of this company, was executed 48 hours after the signatory was deceased. The room was utterly still. The pinched-faced auditor was now staring at Celia. His professional skepticism replaced by something harder. "Finally," I said, my voice dropping, "there is the matter of the foundry itself." I pressed the final button on the remote. The screens went black. For a moment, there was only the sound of the room's ventilation. Then, audio filled the space, my voice, then Celia's, crisp and clear from the phone recording. "The foundry is a corporate protection structure, a perfectly legal one, to protect us from idiotic tax liabilities." The committee members' heads swiveled toward Celia. Her face was a white mask of fury. "Your father understood these things. He signed off on everything because he loved me, and he trusted me to protect his legacy." The recording ended. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Evelyn Thorne, the general counsel, was the first to speak, her voice cutting through the tension like glass. "Ms. Gray," she said, her eyes fixed on Celia. "The anonymous email we received mentioned a trust deed. Can you elaborate on the trust deed documents related to this foundry fund, allegedly housed on the 19th floor?" Celia finally moved. She looked at Thorne, a condescending smile touching her red lips. "It's a contingency fund, Evelyn, a hedge, structured as a trust for tax purposes. It's aggressive, but perfectly standard." It was a weak bluff, and everyone knew it. I stepped away from the podium. I walked to the vast mahogany table and, from my leather portfolio, I withdrew 2 items. First, I placed the codicil from my father's safe on the polished wood, its cover facing the chairman. Then, I placed the original handwritten letter from the blue folder beside it. I slid them across the table. "This," I said, my voice no longer amplified but carrying with its own weight, "is my father's directive, legally filed, appointing me protector of his shares in the event of his death, and this is his letter, stating that the shares were being taken, not sold." The independent auditor picked up the letter. He read it, then passed it to the chairman. His face was grim. He looked at the chairman and then at Celia. His voice was quiet, but carried the force of a final judgment. "We need to contact the commission," he said. "Immediately, I am officially recommending to this committee that we request a halt on all trading of Northbridge stock, pending an immediate and thorough internal investigation." Panic, cold and sharp, finally flashed in Celia's eyes. The threat of SEC intervention and a trading halt was a corporate death sentence. It was the one thing she couldn't control. She turned her head slowly, her gaze locking onto me. The look was not one of anger. It was one of pure, venomous hatred. "You don't understand what you've done," she whispered, her voice a low, dangerous tremor. I met her stare. The fear I had lived with for a year was gone, burned away by the cold fire of this moment. "I understand perfectly," I replied, my voice clear and ringing in the silent room. "I've just restored my father's 18% voice." The chairman of the audit committee, a man who had not moved a muscle for the entire presentation, finally acted. He picked up a small wooden gavel from the table in front of him, an archaic symbol of order for their internal proceedings. He didn't slam it. He brought it down with a single, sharp, definitive rap. The sound echoed like a gunshot. "This meeting is adjourned," he declared, his eyes fixed on Celia. "Celia Gray is suspended from all duties as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building." The investor call began at precisely 9:30 a.m. from Braxton Hall. We listened on a secure speakerphone. The audio piped in with sterile clarity. The disembodied voice of the investor relations lead was smooth, practiced, a calming corporate balm. "Good morning, and welcome to the Northbridge Conveyance third quarter earnings call. At this time, all participants are in a listen-only mode. Later, we will conduct a question-and-answer session." He went through the standard legal disclaimers about forward-looking statements, his voice a metronome of corporate procedure, on the other side of the country, on trading floors and in investment banks. Analysts were poised, ready to dissect every syllable for signs of weakness or strength. It was the normal rhythm of capital, the pulse of the market. Then, the rhythm broke. "This is Evelyn Thorne, General Counsel for Northbridge Conveyance." A new voice cut in, sharp and cold. The IR lead was cut off mid-sentence. An audible ripple of surprise, a collective digital intake of breath, seemed to travel down the silent phone line. This was not on the script. "Before we proceed to the quarterly results and the Q&A," Thorne continued, her voice devoid of emotion, "the company has a statement, effective as of 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time today. The board has placed Chief Financial Officer Celia Gray on an indefinite administrative leave. Furthermore, the Audit Committee has initiated a full independent review of certain off-book financial structures, including an internal fund designated as the Foundry." For a half-second, there was absolute silence. It was the sound of 100 analysts simultaneously processing a system shock. Then, a new sound began, a quiet crackle that grew into a storm, the frantic, furious clicking of 1,000 keyboards. It was the sound of headlines being written, of alerts being blasted to clients, of sell orders being queued. It was the sound of a narrative shattering in real time. On a monitor in the corner of the room, we watched the live stock ticker. The green letters NTB, C flickered, then froze. A new line of text appeared beside it in stark red. Trading halted, pending news. The digital heartbeat of the market had flatlined. The chairman of the audit committee nodded at me. It was my turn. Evelyn Thorne introduced me, her voice still ablade. We will now hear a brief statement from Marin Cole, who, as per a corporate codicil filed by the late Thomas Cole, is the designated beneficiary protector of his 18% share block. I leaned forward to the microphone. My voice, when it came out, was not the voice of the intern. It was the voice of a daughter. I am not here to comment on financial performance, I said, my words slow and deliberate. I am here to read a single sentence from a letter my father, Thomas Cole, wrote shortly before his death. Through a glass wall connecting Braxton Hall to a smaller adjacent conference room, I could see Celia. She stood rigid, flanked by 2 uniformed security guards who kept a respectful but unbreachable distance. Her face was the color of bone china, her crimson lipstick a garish wound. She was a queen in a glass cell, forced to watch the public dismantling of her reign. I held the letter, my father's familiar script a source of strength. I read his words into the microphone, sending them across the wire to the listening, waiting world. If you're reading this, don't believe the stories about debt. They want the shares, not the money. I said nothing more. The weight of his words, of a voice from beyond the grave, filled the silence. He was a ghost at the public feast, and he was pointing a finger directly at his own widow. The chairman spoke next, his voice a low rumble of authority. In light of these developments and the evidence presented to the board this morning, I am announcing that Northbridge will be convening an emergency meeting of shareholders. The sole purpose of this meeting will be to review and vote on the rescission of the recent transfer of Mr. Cole's 18% share block, which the board has reason to believe was executed under fraudulent pretenses. It was a legal declaration of war. He had publicly branded her a fraud. Then came the final, unexpected blow. The lead independent auditor, the man with the pinched face, took the microphone. His firm's reputation was now on the line. Our firm is cooperating fully with the committee's investigation, he stated, his voice tight. As part of our due diligence, we are unsealing the records of a previous internal inquiry conducted last year. That inquiry was led by an auditor named Harper Dade. Mr. Dade resigned abruptly during his investigation, citing personal reasons. He has not been reachable since. Given the information that has come to light this morning, we are officially classifying Mr. Dade as a material witness and a potential whistleblower. We are asking that anyone with information regarding his whereabouts please come forward. Celia flinched. It was a small, violent jerk of her head. The naming of Harper Dade had changed everything. This was no longer just a white-collar financial crime. It was now a public inquiry into a missing person, a man who had been investigating her and had vanished. The implication was dark, unspoken, and terrifying. My phone, lying face down on the table, vibrated. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Beck. It's everywhere. The Ledger just dropped a headline. The intern who flipped the CFO. You're famous. I reached forward and pressed the mute button on my microphone, cutting my connection to the call. My part was over. The questions, the frantic analysis, the fallout. That was just noise now. All that was left in the room was the low, electric hum of the open line, a carrier wave of chaos. Across the hall, behind the glass, Celia seemed to shrink. The fight had gone out of her. Her shoulders, which had been ramrod straight, slumped. She was no longer a name on a stock exchange, a power player in a boardroom. She was a liability. She was a suspect. She looked slowly down at the temporary visitor's badge the security guard had given her. Then, with a hand that was finally unsteady, She reached up, unclipped her own Northbridge ID, the one that read, Chief Financial Officer. She held it for a moment, then placed it on the table in front of her. She didn't drop it. She set it down with a quiet finality, like a surgeon laying down a broken, useless knife. The investor call was over, but the shockwave was still expanding. In the silent aftermath of Braxton Hall, the chairman of the audit committee looked at the head of corporate security. He didn't need to say a word. The command was understood. They took the executive elevator, a silent, swift ascent to the heart of the conspiracy. I followed, a quiet shadow in their wake. The 19th floor was no longer a forbidden kingdom. It was a crime scene being cordoned off. The air was frigid, the silence absolute. The security chief used a master keycard to open the heavy oak door to Celia's corner office. It swung inward, revealing a space of minimalist, expensive taste. It was less an office and more a monument to her own success. The committee ignored the art, the view, the sweeping desk. Their focus was a large, steel-gray safe, built flush into the wall behind a modern painting. It was the physical manifestation of the floor's black box, a corporate locksmith, summoned with an urgency that bypassed all normal procedure, worked with quiet efficiency. The sound of his high-tensile drill biting into metal was the only sound in the room. With a final, heavy thunk, the lock mechanism broke. The locksmith stepped back, and the security chief pulled the heavy door open. For a moment, it seemed to hold its breath. Then, a torrent of paper spilled out. Not neatly stacked files, but a chaotic avalanche of documents, folders, and ledgers, as if the safe itself were vomiting up its secrets. Trust deeds, offshore account statements, payment authorizations from the Foundry Fund, and at the very top, a thick file labeled simply, H. Dade. I didn't step into the room. I remained in the hallway, standing before the polished glass partition that overlooked the city. I saw my reflection, and for the first time, I didn't recognize the person looking back. The uncertainty was gone. The soft edges of the grieving graduate, the broke daughter who had returned home in defeat, had been burned away. In her place was a woman with clear, cold eyes and a straight spine. My reflection wasn't smiling, it was watching. Its expression one of grim finality. The girl who had arrived at Northbridge was gone. I had buried her somewhere between the data mines and the 19th floor. Evelyn Thorne emerged from the office, her face a mask of grim professionalism. She held a single document and a pen. It wasn't a peace treaty. It was an instrument of corporate law, a temporary but legally binding acknowledgement. Ms. Cole, she said, her voice formal. This is a provisional confirmation of your protector status over the Cole share block. As stipulated by the codicil, the board has authorized it. Pending the full shareholder vote, it restores your father's voting rights, to you, effective immediately. I took the pen. It felt heavy in my hand. I signed my name, Marin Cole, on the line she indicated. The scratching of the nib on the thick paper was the only sound. It was the quietest, most significant signature of my life. I hadn't just signed a document, I had taken back my name. As I handed the pen back, the main elevator doors slid open down the hall. Celia emerged, flanked by the two guards. She was no longer a C-suite executive. She was a liability being removed from the premises. Her briefcase was gone. Her movements were stiff. Her face a blank canvas of shock. She had to walk past me to get to the service elevator, the only exit now available to her. She kept her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to acknowledge my existence, but as she passed, the scent of her cold, floral perfume was different. It was tainted, underscored by a faint, sharp odor. It was the smell of metal left out in the rain, the smell of rust, the smell of decay. The elevator doors closed, and she was gone. Beck was waiting for me when I got back down to the logistics floor. The sea of cubicles was buzzing with hushed, frantic energy. My desk, my temporary workstation, felt like an artifact from another life. He looked at me, his eyes wide. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. I looked around at the office, at the blinking lights on the phones, at the nervous faces peering over cubicle walls. I thought of the papers spilling from the safe, of Celia's face, of my father's letter. "It's over," I said. I sat down at my computer for the last time. My fingers moved over the keyboard, my actions feeling distant, automatic. I opened a new email. The recipient was the head of Human Resources. The subject line I typed was a final, deliberate act of defiance. I took their motto, the one etched in silver in the lobby, and I gave it back to them. Corrected. Subject: We move what matters, truth. The body of the email was 2 words: I resign. I hit send. From my bag, I pulled the worn, dusty blue folder. I ran my fingers over the soft cardboard. It was just an object, a collection of paper and ink, but it had been a key, a map, a weapon. It had been my father's last message in a bottle. Now, its journey was done. Its contents were scanned, cataloged, and in the hands of lawyers and auditors, I slipped it back into my bag. It was a keepsake now, nothing more. I stood up and walked away from the desk without looking back. I didn't take anything with me. There was nothing there I wanted. I rode the main elevator down alone. It descended through the heart of the glass tower, a silent, steady drop. As the floors ticked past, 19, 18, 6, I watched the city of Braxton grow larger, the world outside rushing up to meet me. The low, resonant hum of the elevator cables was a long, sustained note, a final chord. The elevator settled into place on the ground floor. The doors slid open, revealing the polished granite of the lobby and the bright, unfiltered light of the world beyond. And for the first time since graduation night, I smiled. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to see where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are. It's amazing to think about how far these stories can travel. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel and giving this video a like. And if you really want to support the work, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.